Hello everyone and welcome to another one of Charnwood Forest Geopark's public talks, bringing you all the news and research and fabulous work that's going on in Charnwood Forest to uncover all the aspects of its geology, history, biology and everything else, and connecting you with the experts who know it the most and can share that story so wonderfully with the public. Now, first of all, we've had a number of these now, and if you'd like to watch them again, you can find them all on YouTube. We've had talks on the mud at the bottom of Groovy Pool and what it can tell us about environmental change over the past few hundred years. And most recently, we had Professor Duncan McIlroy from Memorial University of Newfoundland, who told us about the new discovery of Charnia brazieri, both from the rocks of Bradgate Park and also from the beautiful shores of Newfoundland in Canada. But this week, we're going to have something different as well. And I can see there's lots of people joining us today. Welcome to both returning people and people who've come before. I can see we've got friends, understandably, many from Leicestershire, from Anstey and Corn and Croft, Markfield, Loughborough, Ashby and Glenfield. And I can see we've got friends from all around the world joining us. You are most welcome. And I should, of course, say that everything we do at Charnwood Forest Geopark is funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So thank you to all of the National Lottery players. You make this happen and you provide our opportunity to give these talks for free to the public. At that point, just a few little notices about everything that's going on in the Geopark and going to be happening tonight. I should have said, by the way, for those that don't know, my name is Jack Matthews. I'm the Geo Heritage Officer at Charnwood Forest Geopark. And if you'd like to discover more about our fossil story, we've got lots going on. We've got a big event coming up at Bradgate Park. Tickets have now sold out, but of course it's worth getting on the waiting list because if any free up, they will be made available straight away. This is Geopark in the Dark, where we're going to be lighting up the ruins of Bradgate Park, surrounding them with all models of our wonderful 560 million year old fossils. It's going to be an event not to be missed, and you can find more about that and everything else that we do at charnwoodforest.org. Now, I think that is enough from me. Tonight, we are very pleased to welcome back Dr. Susan Kilby. Many of you will know Susan because until 2025, she was our education officer, getting the message out there to all of our school children in and around Charnwood Forest of the wonders of this place, not just its geology, but its rich heritage, its landscape, its people and its places. And on that note of its places, she will talk tonight. Susan is a research fellow at the Institute for Name Studies at the University of Nottingham and a visiting fellow at the Centre for English Local History at the University of Leicester. She has also been the secretary for the Medieval Settlement Research Group in the UK and has published a number of very important publications, including in 2020, Peasant Perspectives on the Medieval Landscape. We are very pleased to welcome her back. Dr. Susan Kilby, thank you for joining us. What's it like to be back at the Geopark?
Well, it feels good, actually. Yeah, it's nice. And very much looking forward to talking about all things Charnwood Forest.
So we are about to hear about Charnwood Forest place names, but just before I disappear into the background and give the stage fully to Susan for a fantastic presentation, two things to remember. One, if you have a question for Susan, please pop it into the chat, whether you're joining us on YouTube or on Facebook. I will also, if you can't access the chat from either of those outlets, I'll be popping up my work cell phone number at various times, and you can text me your question. Get your questions in and I will put them to Susan at the end. The other thing we're going to be doing, which is very interesting, is Susan has set you all a little quiz. where you're going to be asked questions about what are the meanings behind some of the Charnwood Forest place names. And you're going to be able to do that interactively. Of course, you have the choice to follow along on pen and paper, but if you'd like, have your device ready to scan a QR code or type in a small URL, and then we'll be able to go through the quiz together. Fingers crossed it all works, but at the end of the day, it's a bit of fun. Now, without further ado, Dr. Susan Kilby, who's going to be telling us the fantastic story of the place names of Charnwood Forest. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Jack. Well, thanks very much for the invite, and it's really great to be back and combining two of my very favourite things, actually, place names and Charnwood Forest. So this evening, what we're going to be doing is we're going to begin with a sort of a beginner's guide to place names, what they are, how we can understand them. Then we're going to take a look in a little bit more detail at some of the exciting place names of Charnwood Forest. And then, as Jack has said, we are going to take you on a little quiz journey, which we've never actually done online before. I normally do this live. So I hope that you will you'll really enjoy that. It's a part of the talk that I generally enjoy, and audiences find to be just a little bit of fun. So let's start thinking then about the place names of Charnwood Forest. If we think about the history of Charnwood Forest from a documentary perspective, the region has no documentary material that predates Domesday Book, so that's 1086. So this means that if we want to think about the period before that, we have to rely on archaeology and place names to understand elements of its human history. Now, archaeological evidence is quite frequently hugely exciting. It's material in nature, though, and often tells us more about individuals, whereas place names allow us to see the world, specifically here, the landscape of Charnwood Forest, through the eyes of those who named it. And that's what I want to do tonight. That's the journey that I hope to take you on. Now, because we're doing this sort of back to front in the sense that I'd normally do thanks at the end, I wanted to do that right up front, actually, because we're doing the quiz later. And it's important for me to say I'm a documentary historian. I trained at Leicester, and I work in the English department at the University of Nottingham. I'm not a linguist or a philologist. So all the thanks to all the material, for all the material that you're going to see this evening, go to Barry Cox and to colleagues at the INS. And Barry very recently finished the full kind of set of place names of Leicestershire volumes, and they're available at the EPNS store, and you can see the URL there. I think Jack's going to put it in the chat. And Charnwood Forest is covered by volumes 6 and 7. So volume 6 is Sparkenhoe 100, volume 7 being West Goscote. You can see it on the slide there. And if you fancy something a little lighter, you can have a look at the Dictionary of Leicestershire and Rutland Place Names, also by Barry Cox. So I'm really kind of standing on the shoulders of giants in everything that I'm going to tell you today. So let's begin, first of all, by just reminding everyone of the boundaries of the region of Charnwood Forest. And you can see there that we border Leicester to the southeast of the region, Loughborough to the north, Loughborough and Shepshed to the north, I should say, and Colville to the west. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with this, but just in case there's anyone there who hasn't come along to one of these talks before, I thought I'd put it up for you. So let's begin by thinking about what place names are. So most people, I think, are fairly comfortable with settlement names. So I've given you the example of Whitwick here. A settlement name can be a city, a town, a village, a hamlet, a really tiny settlement, of course. We've got street names, and I've given you, I'm sure those of you who know Charnwood Forest well will have toiled up Breakback Road once or twice in your time. And then we go on to minor landscape names. So that might be, here we've got a watercourse, Blackbrook. It could be a body of water, it might be a hill or a mountain or a wood, anything topographical, essentially. And then we go on to field names. Minor landscape names and field names are my favourite type of place name, and a lot of my work uses those kinds of place name. So we're going to think a little bit about place names that relate to fields, in particularly when we get to the quiz. And of course, things like river names. So they cover a whole range of different place name types. So let's think now about how place names work and how scholars think about place names of all kinds. And I'm giving you an example here of Botcherston, which is right on the edge of the geopark, right on the southwest corner. And you can see that I've drawn you a line, and that's because that place name is made up of two elements. So the generic element, which is the TON at the end, and you're all probably sitting there thinking now, yeah, I've kind of seen that before, and you can see that it's featured here in Cropston, Thornton, Thurkeston, Stanton, and also Thringston, even though Thringston looks slightly different. So this is actually an Anglo-Saxon Old English generic element, and it means well, when it was first coined, it meant probably farmstead, but it comes to be a sort of generic term for a village or a settlement. So it's quite an important term to be able to recognise. And then we go on to the first element in that place name, which we call the qualifier. And in this instance, I mean, it could be anything. So, if you look at Thornton, that looks like something that you could probably unpick. Actually, Cropston looks like something you could probably unpick, but it isn't. And we'll come on to that in a little while. But with Botcherston, you'll see in a second that we've actually got a personal name. So the qualifying element tells us something very specific about this particular tune, this particular settlement. And if we go on and explore Botcherston a little bit more, I can tell you that it means Bochard's settlement. And you can see from the slide there that that's an Old French masculine personal name. Now, you might be thinking, well, how on earth do we possibly know that? Well, what we need as place name scholars are lots and lots of early spellings, if we're lucky. And you can see here that the earliest spelling for Botcherston is from 1265, right at the top there. And from those earliest attestations, Barry Cox will have been able to determine that this can only relate to Bochard's settlement. In this instance, it's actually quite simple, but that's not always the case. So these really early spellings are really very, very important. Sometimes without them, it can be almost impossible to be certain about the meaning of a particular place name. So that's something that's kind of worth remembering as we go through this presentation. So you've had you'll recognise these tune names, and you're probably already on the right track in thinking about why I've put that red line down the middle of this slide. So we've got Thurkeston, Cropston, Thornton and Thringston, all Anglo-Saxon settlements. And then on the right-hand side, these are all our Scandinavian settlements. So let's start by thinking about Ratby and Garuby at the top. you can see, you will already have got your eye in based on what we've just covered, and have noticed that they both end in by, bu in Old Scandinavian. And this is essentially the equivalent of that tun or tun ending for the Anglo-Saxon settlements. Let's skip over the slightly odd third one just for a second and just move on to Woodthorpe. Thorpe is our generic element here, and that is also Scandinavian. And the meaning of that is a sort of satellite settlement, a specialist agricultural settlement. It is the current thinking on that. So you might be wondering what on earth that third place name is. It looks as though it can't possibly be written in English. Well, that's actually because it's written in Old Scandinavian, but it actually relates to Thringston. So Thringston features twice on this slide, and let's unpick that and help you to understand what is going on here. So on the left, we've got our modern spelling of Thringston, and Thringston is it's a hybrid name. So the first part of that, the qualifying part of that, is an Old Norse personal name, Thranga. And what we're seeing on the right-hand side is the spelling that was recorded in Domesday Book for the settlement that became Thringston. So you can see that it's got that bu ending, even though that it's spelled with an I rather than a Y. So what on earth is going on there? Well, we don't necessarily categorically know the answer to that question. It might have been a scribal error. It might have been that the scribe writing that Domesday Book entry saw an Old Norse personal name and thought, well, we're in the Danelaw here. Leicester is one of the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw, of course, and so it's almost certainly going to be a bu ending, and wrote it in. Or perhaps actually that really was one of a number of competing names that were in circulation at that point, and this is the only time that it's written down in this particular format. We just don't know. Now you might be thinking, well, why would there be competing names? We know that this is a phenomenon that does happen. We don't always get lots of evidence that survives for it, but the kind of best example that I can give you is probably the city of Derby, which in the Anglo-Saxon period before the Vikings arrived was known as Northworthy, a good, solid Anglo-Saxon name. So it is perfectly normal for settlement names to change, sometimes, as in the case of Derby, quite dramatically. Northworthy is an enclosure name. It relates to the North enclosure, and Derby is the settlement of the deer, so completely different things that people were looking at, those two different communities were looking at. So let's go on and have a look at some minor names. Let me just take a sip of my water. So I thought you'd like to read some of these beautiful field names and minor landscape names. I thought you'd like to see the kinds of documents that historians and place name scholars look at in order to collect this sort of material. Excuse me a second again. So our first document, which is from Gruby in 1389, excuse me, once I read it, you'll be able to get your eye in, says Row Cliff and Backstone Cliff. So you can see how these field names are working in the same way that I've just described for the settlement names. We've got a generic element in cliff here, and it's a rough cliff, or the second one is a cliff where baking stones can be found or chipped away. which is a fabulous find. In fact, actually, that one isn't in Barry Cox's book. I found that one in the archive some time ago. It's a really nice find. And then let's go on to the example from Ratby in 1445. This one is actually written in English in a copy called Sheet Hedges. Excuse me. And I'm sure that Sheet Hedges is a name that survives into the modern period. Some of you probably know where Sheet Hedges wood is. And what is a copy? Well, it's an early way of spelling the word coppice. And what we can tell you about this name is that this is one of those place names where we can't be completely certain what the meaning is, because we don't have sufficient early spellings and attestations. So it either means a projecting piece of land, the sheet element, or it means shit or dung. And you can take your pick on that one, depending on whereabouts in the geopark you live. And that last element is an enclosure. Excuse me. We've got Horsepool in Whittick in 1471. And then we've got Alderman's Haugh on that lovely map extract for 1754. Which is the Ealdorman's enclosed woodland, and that Haugh ending, possibly indicates a reference to hunting. So, I've already alluded to the fact that there are different languages being referenced within some of these place names. Let's have a look at the kinds of languages that we can expect to see in some of these names. I'm going to have to put a throat lozenge in, I'm afraid, because my throat is going. I've had a cold this week. Apologies if you can hear me munching on that. So pre-Romans, we are looking at the Britons, of course, who spoke a British language. It is the forerunner of modern Welsh, essentially. So that's in the run up to the Romans arriving, and then of course we have the Anglo-Saxons speaking and writing in Old English and also Latin. The Vikings speaking Old Norse, and the Normans speaking Anglo-Norman and writing in Anglo-Norman and Latin. So let's have a look at some examples. This is a really beautiful example of a hybrid name that combines primitive Welsh, that British language, with Old English. We've got Kernelea, as it would have been pronounced in that period. Once it comes into Old English, we get that sort of ch sound for Charlie, and we can translate this as woodland at the rocks or the stone wood. It's a beautiful name, and it's the name that gives us Charnwood Forest, of course. Let's move on to Loughborough. We've got no Roman names, sadly, but here again we've got a lovely Old English masculine personal name with our generic element of bourg, in this case fortified place, but that is another one of those elements that can mean a number of things depending on when it was first coined. Gruby, this is of course one of our Viking names that we've already identified as Viking, and take a look at those spellings from the 12th century on the second line there. And we can see how what looks to outsiders like it should be called Grobby is actually Gruby. And you can see there that means settlement by the deep or hollow pit, a nice reference to Gruby Pool, which Jack mentioned that you've already had a talk on. Mount Sorrel, we now head over to the Normans, and you can see again these are quite attested quite late in the middle of the 12th century, and it's derived entirely from Old French, giving us sorrel-coloured hill, which references the rock there. So again, quite a beautiful name. Now that's where my timeline ends, but of course we don't stop creating settlement names at this at that point, because here we have a lovely modern name in Colville, which was not created until 1846 when Colville was kind of founded, and this is entirely from modern English. Cole plus ville, which was borrowed from the French. So we get Coal Town. Now, this is the sort of bread and butter for the linguists at Nottingham, who love nothing more than to try and unpick all of these different language contacts. And that doesn't necessarily always work in terms of people living in settlements understanding the languages of people who might have lived there before. And I'm just going to nip slightly outside the geopark, because this is such a beautiful classic example. It's the example that almost all place name scholars use to illustrate this point. So here we've got Breedon on the Hill. So it's got two elements, Bree and Doon, and then it's got this suffix, modern English, on the hill. And we can see that this is quite an early attestation for the first part of that, Breedon. And what I can tell you is that the first part of it is British, primitive Welsh. The second part, Doon, is Old English, so that's Anglo-Saxon. And then, of course, we've got this modern 17th century on the hill tacked on. And if we think about place names, when they are first coined, they hold meaning for the communities that create those names. But as we move forward in time, they are simply names. They are simply labels. And here we have the sort of the gloss for this, which is hill on the hill, which just really illustrates that point nicely. So just because we have language contact between two different people doesn't mean that all of the time they necessarily understand what some of those elements might have meant. I'm going to now, I hope you'll forgive me, but I'm going to take you through some teaching resources that I created whilst I worked for the Geopark that I took into local schools. But I think that they're really good at illustrating. I promised you right at the beginning that I would show you Charnwood Forest through the eyes of those who named it. And that's really what I want to do now. And I think this is a nice way of doing it. So when I go into schools, I take a huge floor map that looks like this, and I give the students the cards with the place names on and their glosses, their meanings, and then I give them a whole load of pictures, and they put the pictures on the map. Let's begin by doing that. So the first picture, and we have quite a few of them, is woodland, of course. So even though a forest in the Middle Ages doesn't necessarily mean that it's entirely covered in woodland, it's a legal entity. You need kind of open spaces in addition to woodland. We've got quite a few places here where woodland has been noted in the place name. So Thornton, quite obvious that is referring to thorn trees. We've got Charlie that we've already looked at, and also Rothley. So that layer generic element is telling us something about woodland, and it's an open space in a woodland glade. We've got Woodthorpe, we've got Ratby right down at the bottom, and that's a really nice one. It's settlement at the tree roots. So again, it's telling us something about what the people are doing in that settlement, and they're clearing some of the trees away. And then you might be puzzled a bit by Swidland, because it doesn't look as though it has anything to do with woodland, but that generic element land is actually Lundra, which is a Scandinavian element. This is a Viking name. So, as again you might expect, we've got quite a few references to stone. We talked about Charlie already. We've got Stanton under Barden. That comes from Old English stan, which gives us our modern word stone. And over here at Quarndon, the qualifier here is a reference to a place where quernstones can be obtained and were probably made there. Unsurprisingly, references to hills at Barden and Quarndon. Also Anstey, that's a really beautiful name. Because it's so we've mostly this evening been looking at names that contain two elements, and Anstey only contains one. It's a simplex name, and it means a steep ascending path. And if you think about Anstey's placement, right on the edge of the geopark, right on the edge of the region, as Leicester lifts up into this magnificent upland, that's where Anstey gets its name. We've got references to farming. So Witwick, Wick is a dairy farm in this context. Up at Shepshed, we've got references to sheep. It's a sheep headland. I've already talked a little bit about Woodthorpe, it being an agricultural settlement. We've got a croft at Ulvers Croft here in the middle. And again at Swidland, this is a reference to burning, the burnt wood. And so again, are we talking about a reference to the clearance of land, or some kind of periodic agricultural clearance there, which is quite exciting. We've got pits at Barden and Gruby, Barrow here at Barden, and we've already talked about the pit at Gruby. And we've got a fortified place at Loughborough. Now, let's look at the people. That's what they saw. So they saw trees, woodland, and agriculture in the main, and upland, of course. But let's think about the people. So this is my little symbol for the Britons here at Charlie. Let's look at the Anglo-Saxons, and we can see them all across the region. And now let's look at the Scandinavians, the Vikings. We could almost kind of draw a line right across the middle here, apart from the fact that we've got Thringston up here on our northwestern edge. There are lots of names that are hybrid, so Thringston is one of them. Of course, we've got to think about that odd Trangersby. But we've got, I promised you I'd talk to you about Cropston. You probably wondered whether that might relate to farming in some way. And you can see that I've got an Anglo-Saxon and a Viking. Well, that's actually because it's got an Anglo-Saxon ending, but we just don't know whether that masculine personal name, Cropper, is Anglo-Saxon or Viking. It could, in fact, be either. And we've got another a nice hybrid name here at Thurkeston. That's a Viking masculine personal name again, with an Old English generic element. And then finally, down here at Botcherston, we've got our Normans. So what I wanted to do next was to give you a very brief look before we go into the quiz at some of those things that make Charnwood Forest what it is. And we'll begin by looking at hills. What you've got on this slide is a combination of settlement names and minor landscape names. And I wanted to do this because I wanted you to see that it's not just about what the settlement names tell us. It's important for us to see how the whole of this landscape is being memorized by people who are naming it. Now, this is a very, very busy slide. We're not going to look at all of these. I've just picked a few to show you. So the first one I'm going to pick is one of my favourites, Cayderman. Many of you will know Cayderman Wood up in Whitwick. And this is yet another British primitive Welsh element. And it is it's an element that essentially means chair or seat. It's often used in hills and mountains. So that's a really beautiful one there. We've got hanging lands at Rothley, which you might immediately start thinking of, gore and macabre, but actually this is an Old English hangender, which is a steep hill or a slope. The beautiful Toot Hill at Groby, which is an Old English lookout hill. It's an Anglo-Saxon lookout hill. There are Toot Hills all over England. And Pelder Tor in Whitwick, which is probably a generic element that you'll recognise, a tor, something that you might more readily find in a mountain range or in the Lake District. But what I want you to take away from this is that the Anglo-Saxons and the Scandinavians, the Vikings, had a very, very rich landscape vocabulary, much richer than ours is today. And you can see that in what I'm showing you here. Let's move on to Woodland and do the same thing. Again, another really, really busy slide, but let's pick some for us to just dig into in a little bit more detail. This is Newhurst at Shepshed. And again, it's one of those very, very nuanced elements. Hurst, Old English, means wooded hill. You can still see this in place names today. It's a really beautiful element. Woolden Hill in Anstey, a school actually. We've got a school named after this place name, a school that I visited when I worked for the Geopark. And this comes from the Old English element wald, which is woodland high forest land. Again, would have fitted this location really nicely. Martinshaw Wood over in Ratby, which is, again, I think a place that many of you will be familiar with. And that shore comes from Old English shore, which is a small wood, as you can see there. And up at Charlie here lay holts, and a holt is, we think, a single species wood. So again, lots of real nuance when we look at these elements. And finally, before it's your turn and we go on to the quiz, here we have some references to rocks. I thought I would, I had to put this in while Jack was here to see what the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings noticed about rocks. So let's start at Ulverscroft with Hammercliff Lodge. And again, Barry Cox thinks that is from Old Norse hamar, which is a term for a rock or cliff. So nice and, very fitting for Charnwood Forest. Cliff Slade Lane up in Whitwick. Well, that's where we get our modern word for cliff from. And if you look carefully across this slide, you'll see a number of cliff terms. Slade, incidentally, is also an Old English element. It's a valley, usually a stream valley, a wet valley. And I thought I'd include this one, even though we're not really sure about it. Harrow Close at Rothley, Barry thinks, is a Scandinavian term for a heap of stones or a cairn, just like that Charlie name.